Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Rob. Okay, we're going into the next sequence of the video. The lower level, we covered bar joists, we covered tie beams, we covered boring the slab, electrical prep. A lot of this is very similar to the lower level. So I thought, let's change this up a little bit. We're going to go through an overview and look at what's there. But there were problems and situations that occurred during the development of this job that we didn't have answers to how we were going to do it. We've touched on some of them, the pool, the north wall, raising the ceilings to get 13 foot in some of the rooms. I want to go through and show you how they wound up, how they got to where they are, and how we did it and why. Okay, it's very easy to look at something afterwards and say that makes sense. It's very hard to look at a plan where you have to dig down 12 feet without the wall caving in and say, oh, it's, you know, when the wall is in, that's going to hold great, but how do you hold the soil until the wall goes in? So there are things that you have to work out, and you have to be able to look at the plan ahead of time and pick out what those things are. It's very easy to work through it, but if you don't think this stuff out, what happens is you get to a point when you're like, oh man, there's a snag. I can't do this because I never thought of that. Like until I got the north wall in, I couldn't dig out the driveway. Until I got the driveway in, I couldn't pull out the sheet piles. I couldn't access the garage. I couldn't get rid of the soil. It goes on and on and on. With the pool, it's how do I support the dirt? How do I get to support the actual pool of, you know, 1 story up? You know, these aren't things that you can just figure out when you get to them in your sequence. You have to think ahead of time or it doesn't work out. I always say it's planning, and it always is. But now I just want to show you how some of those things happened and why we went in the direction we went. Okay? So, let's just start off here. This is a general overview. We have since poured the upper level. We have since raised the walls and gotten up. But what I want to show you here is where certain things came into effect. For example, on this wall, you'll see that plastic PVC fence that's there. I have to dig this soil down 12 feet, okay? With the pool, we talked about this last week, how this is a floor up. As we go on, I'm going to show you what we did, okay? When you get over here to the club room, and we'll show you in a video, this ceiling had to be 13 feet. Where all the rest of the ceilings that we build are usually somewhere between 10 and 12. So all this has to be thought out ahead of time or you come to a glitch. So why don't you start up? Okay, hold it there. Okay, this is the north wall. I'm going to go further into this when we do the pictures. But you can see what happens here. From here, I have to go down 12 feet, okay? There are issues with putting in what we normally do, okay? The normal way of addressing this would be to put sheet piles in, just like we did around the house. The problem is, look at the proximity of the neighbor's house to that, okay? Even if I do small sheet piles, meaning narrow, it would still be abusive to that house. I'd wind up cracking those walls. Even though we put in a seismic reader to read what it is, when we put the piles in over here, we reached a limit of how far we could go as far as vibrations. Going to here would have damaged that house. So we had to go to another method. I'll go through that when we get to the photos. It'll be easier to see. But we decided to go to this method, which in all honesty, I haven't used before, but we did some research. We found a problem. We discussed it with the engineers. We discussed it with the team to figure out what would be the best way to cause the least vibration to the neighbor's property, give us the stability we needed, be able to function within the parameters we have for a driveway, within the room, getting the equipment in, and how long it would take to get in and the cost involved. All those parameters you have to try to figure out. We went 15 different ways on this wall. This is what we wound up with. Go ahead. Okay. The pool. The pool is actually 1 story up. It's flush with the first floor, where most of the pools we put in are down at grade level. At grade level, you dig the hole, you can put the bracing in, you can do everything you gotta do. You don't have to worry about support. Here, you're 1 foot up, so when you walk out of the first floor, you're gonna be walking to the pool. We put these two walls in, not to support the pool, but to hold the dirt and support the frame of the pool, okay? This is important. This was never meant to hold the pool up. So when we were looking at the footing plans and how we did this, we had to know what was going to support what. The original plans had the footing only going from here to here and not supporting anything there. We went to the engineer, we worked out how to modify that design to support that wall. Now that wall is not going to support the pool. And more importantly, when you pour, we had to figure out how to pour the pool separate of that wall so that we didn't have a crack. Okay? When you have two dissimilar supported items, they always run the potential for a crack because this will shift and this won't. So this is what we did. In front of this, the grade beam, the footer that runs across here, it's actually a grade beam, it's supported by piles, runs straight across. This is sitting on that. We put a piece of polyiso insulation board across here because what we're going to do is we're going to frame this up, support the pool itself, and make it one monolithic pour. But we don't want it connected to this wall. Because if my pool wall is here and this wall is here, and I connect them, if I shoot and fasten to it, and this one settles a little bit, I'm going to have a crack across here. In order to avoid that, we put polyiso across here, and I'll show you in the pictures later, so that when they frame straight down into the top of where the piles are. That way the piles are supporting the pool, not the footer. It allows us to shoot in front of that polyiso, keeping them separate. So if this wall shifts this way, up, down, this wall that we're now going to frame and shoot is independent of it. So what we want is we want this pool and this wall to be one item, self-supporting without that. Theoretically, when this is done, if this wall failed and this soil dropped, the pool would still be there because it's sitting on the piles here and it's sitting on these piles here. This is not structural. This is merely there to hold the dirt back so we could do this. Okay. One set of 31. Okay. Post shores. Everybody sees the post shores are in place. If you look at the video as we go along, the post shores are still in place on the lower level. There's a reason for that, okay? Theoretically, I could remove a post shore when that beam, when the PSI rating on the concrete test reached 75% of design strength. So if the PSI comes back from nutting, and let's say that's spec to be 6,000 PSI. When it hits 4,500 PSI, I can take the post shores out. I never take them out when this is supporting something above. In other words, until that upper beam that I'm going to pour next reaches strength, that's all additional weight on that wall. So although this beam can hold its own weight, it's never intended in a window to hold the weight of the floor above. So I leave the post shores in because during the process, that weight above is added to that beam. It makes it double the design weight. So wherever I have an opening that has a beam above that is going to continue up, I leave the post shores in. It's a safety factor, okay? Had it been a deck and there was nothing above it, or had this been the last run, as soon as it reached 75%, it would have come out. When you look in the garage, you'll see that when there's a wall going that's going to support what's above, but it hasn't cured, so it's not self-supporting yet. Until it is self-supporting, it's bearing weight straight down that you normally wouldn't have. Understand that? All right, go ahead. Okay, please sit there. Okay, you see the gray bar joists? You see the silver bar joists? Okay. This room will be partially outside, partially inside. It's an outside loggia, but when the doors are open, it's affected by everything that would be open if the doors weren't there. It would be just like any of these. So in this area, everything's galvanized, okay? When you get a plan and you're looking at the bar joist, you're looking at the structural and the shop drawings for the beams, make sure you're taking special note to what is outside, okay? It's almost 99% of the time it's caught by the engineer. If it's not, point it out, okay? I've seen beams that we put in and enclose them, and we take them out, we take the surrounding out 5 years later, and they're gone. They're rotted to holy hell because of the weather. Drew, where's Drew? Drew will tell you, we just opened up some walls at another job, and the beams were literally missing for like 2 feet. They had rotted so bad. This is very important on anything outside, okay? It's the same reason we do a rust inhibitor in the concrete to save the beam, to save the rebar on the outside walls, okay? The mix of the concrete, this is all important when you're building on the ocean, okay? And these are things you have to pay attention to. Okay, stop it. Okay. Steel beams rather than bar joists, okay? In this room and a room next to it, we were tasked with getting a 13-foot ceiling, okay? The problem is when you're over large expanses, you still have to have the structural support to do it. If you look at the rest of these areas, and when we go by a little bit, you'll see it, and you saw the bar joist going in. When you have a large expanse, you wind up with a K20, a 20-inch bar joist. When they go into short areas, like you'll later see over there, they're only 12-inch. In order to get the height in these rooms, we had to reduce the height of that bar joist. The top is going to stay constant. We want to bring the bottom up. By going to steel, we can put a 12-inch beam rather than a 20-inch bar joist. So in this area, we did beams running across. This is great. It also poses some problems because, again, you got to think ahead. If you don't have bar joists, can you get your plumbing through? Can you get your air conditioning through? Now you have to go to your mechanical plans and make sure there's a means to get ductwork to this area. You have to make sure there's a means to get a drain in there because you can't go through the beam. And you can't call the architect and say, can I drill it? Because you don't want to do that. It's only 12 inches high. So the first part of this is determining how to get the 12-inch beam, how to get the 13-foot ceiling. The second thing is looking at what the ricochet effect of that is. What does it do to your ductwork? What does it do to your drains? Water lines you can play with. They're under pressure. You can go up, down, left, right. Drains, you have to stay consistent. One of the ways we talked about doing this was doing a rear discharge toilet, because now I can run it across the wall rather than under the floor and come down in an area that's not 13 foot, okay? These are all things that we thought about before we put the slab in. So these are things you got to think about. And again, what's the task? How do you do it? And what are the effects to everything else, right? Okay. Okay, stop. Stop it there. This is the area we were just talking about. See, we've got the steel joist here. We do have bar joists here. But you see the length of the run? Because the run is small, I don't need K20s. I can use K12s. That meant these bar joists can be the same depth as these steel beams. When you go to the next section over here where the run is longer, these are now 20 inches deep. So all this planning you have to do ahead of time. The rest of this works the same way. Once you get above that, it's all the same. The decking, the concrete, the pour, everything's the same. But you have to look at what you have to do and what is the outcome of it. Go ahead. Okay. This is typical to what we saw on the other floor. Sleeves, electrical boxes, electrical boxes. This is a repetition now of what we did on the basement level, the first floor, and the second. Okay. Okay, hold it for a second. First thing, after you pour this deck, you should get these safety railings on. Okay? Those railings should be in your contract with your shell contractor. He's possible. Don't assume when you're up there you can just lean on these and go. I've seen people do stupid stuff, and that's one of them, okay? Although they're strong, They're not always that strong. The other thing is you're at a point now where hard hats are mandatory. Okay, there's things that could fall, there's sparks that could fall, there's beams, there's concrete cutting, there's people chipping. Hard hats, an absolute must at this point. If you're on a job and you see somebody without them, take action. Get them a hat, pull them off the job, do whatever. Don't let them in these jobs without a hard hat at this point. Okay? Go ahead. Go to 158. Okay, now we're going back to the pool. Stop it there. Now we're going back to the pool. There's a reason we didn't pour this deck early, okay? All this plumbing, these are actually electric lines for lights. All of these had to go in before time. They all had to go through, they all had to be waterproofed. In the end, the rebar will carry across. All the drains, all the electrical, all of it has to run first. When we were doing the house, we knew how we were going to do the pool. We didn't know how we were going to do the electrical yet. That was a design issue. We had to go through with the owner. Where are the lights? Where do you want them? You know, how are we going to do the lights to what will be just the pit next to the fire pit? All these things were not yet resolved. We knew what we had to do to leave the option open. In the beginning, the shell contractor wanted to pour this deck. If we had poured this deck to begin with, none of this could go in. Okay? So the first part was figuring out how to build a pool. This is stuff you have to do at any pool. And this, you don't have the stress that you have in the beginning to know right away where it's going to go, but you do have to know how you're going to do this. Okay? Go ahead. And here you can see the lighting is coming out. In the end, you have to think of the other half also. All this wiring, all these conduits for these lights have to come up to a box above the water line. Okay, there's nothing out here that's above the water line that you can hide it. In the house back here, there's a mechanical closet with a blank wall. So we're running all of these through the garage and into the mechanical closet. In the end, they're going to have to pull the lines through with a snake. That's not easy to do if it's in a cabinet, which was one of the options. We could put a cabinet that's going there. But you can't get in a cabinet to pull the lines. If you do, you'll destroy the cabinet. So although we didn't know where the lights were going to wind up in a pool, we knew where they had to terminate to. And that was something we had to figure out early. All that goes along with what we're talking about, planning ahead, because if we hadn't done that, we would have put the pool in and said, oh God, what do I do now? Right? Good. Okay, this is the north wall. You've all seen augers before when we did it for the house. The theory here, and we'll get into it when we go to some photos and make it easier to see. Go ahead. The theory here is we're going to build a wall of auger piles. And you'll see more in the end. And freeze it there. So what we did is we put augers in the ground, just as if you were doing augers in the basement of a house. Okay? We offset them slightly for strength. We went through this with the structural engineer. He gave us a plan, where to put them, how wide they had to be, how long they had to be based on the soil conditions. In the end, these were all buried. We left the rebar coming out of the top of the cage long, and it bent into the tie beam, just like you would if you were doing a tie beam on a house. Okay? Once that was all in, we checked with nutting to make sure these met strength, because if they don't meet strength and you start digging this thing out and putting pressure on these, you're setting yourself up. Okay? Once they meet strength, and the architect, the engineer at this point will tell you what the strength is it has to meet. In this case, it had to meet 5,000 PSI. Once you get the report from nutting or whoever you're using that says it reaches 5,000 PSI, then you can dig out the driveway. Okay? Okay. Okay, we go to the photos. Okay, so here we go. The north wall we just talked about. You can see all the piles that are being installed as you run. You don't want to dig this down to put these in, because if you do, you won't have a deck to work on. Right? There's no sense in trying to reduce the height of this, putting these in. The crane has to get in there and you have to be able to do it. Once you get this all done, then you can dig it out. But it makes no sense. You're only making it harder for yourself. Okay? In the end, you pour the grade beam on top, just like you would if you were doing, a tie beam, just as if you were doing a tie beam on a house, right? Tying everything together, you add the bar up to put the block on, just as if you were doing a site wall, right? If you're doing a site wall with a footing, that would be the footing and you'd be bringing the bar up. It's the same thing. Go ahead. Okay? This is forming the tie beam across the top. Pretty much it looks like the grade beam of anything anybody's ever built in a house on top of piles, right? That locks all these beams, all these augers together, keeps them in a straight line, but it gives them strength because now they're working as in unison, not individually. Okay? You can see, as we start to dig it out, you can see what we got. Go ahead. Go ahead. Okay, and as you can see, as they go down, everything gets built out, and you wind up pretty straight to the wall. Go ahead. Go ahead. Okay, this is afterwards. You've met strength, okay? And you can start to excavate out the driveway, and you can see the wall that's formed, okay? Now, at this point, there's a couple of things you can do. If that's your final wall, and in Manalapan it can't be because you can't be more than 6 foot, you could take gunite from the pool, and when you shoot the pool, you could shoot the front of that, and that would make it a straight wall. In our case, there's going to be planters in front of it, so it doesn't make sense to gunite it because we're going to have dirt on both sides. Okay. Okay. Here you can see. This is the wall we put in. This is the beam, and that's the wall on top that we built off of the rebar that we showed you on the previous drawing. Go ahead. Go ahead. Now, had we done this with sheet piles, we would have had to hammer them in, and look at how close the neighbor is. The liability from doing it the other way would have been crazy, and in all honesty, it's about the same price. But in doing an auger, there's no lateral pressure to the soil. It's not a pounding, it's a drilling. So it's probably the best option I've found so far. Okay, okay, the pool like we talked about. Go ahead. Okay, here you can see this starting to form the trough because this is going to overflow and come down. Go ahead. Go ahead. Okay, stop. This is the polyiso board I said we were putting on. This rebar is going straight down, and it's tying into the grade beam that's right on top of the pile. So this wall is being supported directly on the pile. This is going to form all the way up and form the cap of the pool. This was the summation of everything we planned for the last 6 months. Okay, this will turn around, and now when they shoot the gunite on here, just like they shoot it on the pool, it'll be one wall from here all the way down. Go ahead. Go ahead. There's Devin, just to give you the idea of the height of the wall. Go ahead. Okay, inside, just quickly. Starting to do all the roughing, okay? Starting on a lower level, working up. The fact that all these holes are in there without core drilling means that this was completely thought out. The electricians, the plumbers, and everybody put their sleeves in, knowing where they were going through. That's what we were talking about last time. Planning ahead of time, knowing where you're going to run stuff up. You'll see everything is tall, everything is high, okay? And the pipes are running through exactly where we anticipated them going through. The only thing I can't put in right now is ductwork because I can't allow water into the space. And right now I've got the big front windows that are going to be open. Once we get the roof on, I'll tarp them off until the windows go in and we'll start all the ductwork. The only ductwork I am putting in now is the sheets that go over the mechanical room because in running their wires, I don't want to have a conflict getting it through later. If I run the ductwork in, they can run a pipe above, below, and I know I'm not going to have to move them later to get them in. Go ahead. Go ahead. I don't know why I did that. Okay, this is what we were talking about before. We leave the post shores up because there's something above. In this case, there's the eyebrows and everything else in the front and the recesses. So we leave these in until those are poured. Okay, go ahead. Okay, this is the mechanical room. This is the area I'm talking about. We're going to be running ducts through these areas. If I let them run all their wires, and there's going to be wires in all these boxes here, and I have to try fitting this ductwork through later, it's not going to work because I can't get it in. It makes much more sense to get that piece of trunk line in now and let everybody run their lines around it rather than trying to get them through later. Okay. Okay, we're continuing with framing. We've got doorways in. We'll have blocking going in. You can see where all the plumbing that we put through the floor works out. Go ahead. Okay. Again, cold water lines, doorways. This is the garage and the opening. Plumbers are working up tight. They're keeping within the web, so I keep the ceilings high. And we work through early to try to locate areas where we're going to have a conflict. Electricians keeping theirs, they're piping up high. And if you guys remember, we gave everybody a drawing ahead of time that said how big these openings are so everybody could plan. When the ductwork, when the bar joist came in, we knew we had this variable. Okay. Same thing. These are actually the lines coming out from the lights in the pool. These will all tie back into the room we talked about, the mechanical room, so we could pull the lights. Okay. Okay. So what I want you guys to get out of this today is the understanding that you can't just attack things when you get to them at that point of the job. Okay? You have to think ahead to these things so you figure out how you're going to address them. If not, you're going to get to them and your job is going to come to a complete stop. Right? It's like if you don't work out framing details, you can't do mill work. If you don't know the heights, you can't do duct work. When we did the original review of the mechanical plans, the mechanical contractor had the exhaust for the lower level bathrooms running 40 feet across the basement and then 35 feet up to the roof. That doesn't work. Okay, he did the same thing for the exhaust for the dryers. Exhaust for the dryers go, I think, 35 feet, give or take, depending on the manufacturer. They had 40 feet and then straight up for 40 feet. Okay? You have to look at these things ahead of time. You have to review them as if you're an engineer. If you have a concern, you bring it to them. It's important that when these drawings are developed and you have everything, you get everybody together. Okay? When we had the ductwork and the electrical and the plumbing drawings, I brought everyone to Beacon Engineering. And we sat down with everybody. What are your conflicts? What are your conflicts? And we worked all these things out. The ductwork company, in this case, reviewed everything, and we went to them and said, it's got a plenum return on the upper level. You know, plenum return uses the air above the ceiling. If you're on the roof, and anybody who's ever been in an attic knows that the attic is 100 degrees all the time, if not more. It's not exactly what you want to use as a return air. Also, if it's plenum, I can't use trusses because I can't put flammable material into a plenum. So there's all these things that you may not have the answers to, but you need to be able to identify the problems. And even if you don't resolve them, the reason we work with the people we work with is we have a lot of smart people around. And you have to rely on those smart people to address the problems that you bring up. You may catch them and you may solve them. If you solve them, you need their blessing in writing. Okay, a detail, a drawing, a stamp, something. That wall was great. We designed it, it worked. It didn't go in until the engineer gave us a drawing saying it would work, right? You don't have to be the one that solves everything. You have to be able to find it, and then you have to know where to go to get the answers on how to solve it. And once it's solved, you need to have it documented. The engineer on the pool, when we were doing that wall, came back to us and said, I don't know how that wall's going to support We took out the drawings, we showed him, he revised his drawing, they're building it based on the revision. All that's development. Again, we're not taking responsibility for the answers. We are directing the people who are involved to produce the right answers. Okay? If you don't locate the problems, nobody's going to look for them. Okay? You're going to get a call from your shell contractor one day and says, hey, I can't go any further. What do you want me to do? It's something you should have caught 6 months ago. Okay? What keeps these things moving is finding all these things and trying to anticipate what's next. Right? Any questions? Great. Let's go to a meeting.